I wasn't giving myself permission. The only thing stopping me.
Did you have a sense of identity or belonging growing up with seemingly so many different parts?
I grew up in a war zone. I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, and there'd be shelling and bombing and whatever else going on. I always have had this idea of we need every opportunity. I have to take it. You can't turn down an opportunity. It affects me even today, Sean. Investing or looking after our own well-being is not an indulgence. And that's probably why I wasn't doing Route 66. It sounded too selfish.
Welcome back to the You Potential podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Christian van Nieuwerburgh. He's one of the world's leading experts when it comes to coaching and positive psychology. He's a professor, a facilitator, and the author of numerous fantastic books helping people flourish in their lives. He grew up in a Japanese restaurant in wartime Beirut, and in 1997, he found himself stacking bookshelves at a bookstore in Birmingham. And today, he's summiting Kilimanjaro, trekking the Annapurna Circuit, and riding a Harley down Route 66. He spent a career, 40 years, giving people permission to live fully. Now, the question that we tackled today was whether he was giving himself the same permission. This is the You Potential podcast, and I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Dr. Christian van Nieuwerburgh. Before we get into it, please subscribe at YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Enjoy. Dr. Christian Nieuwerburgh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean. So nice to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this. I've appreciated your work for a number of years now. I was fortunate enough to have you as one of the professors in the MAP program I took. And to be able to have this time with you is super enjoyable. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. And I love to talk about these ideas. So to have somebody like you who seems interested is wonderful.
Well, my first question, I know you spent some time in Ireland. Let's imagine it's Friday afternoon. You find yourself in Dublin. You've got nothing to do.
Yeah.
What are you doing? And if you're listening to some music, what are you listening to?
Well, I'm definitely listening to 80s, Sean. 80s music. I work in Dublin. So when I'm in Dublin, I'm staying in hotels. So if it's around 5 o'clock, I'm kind of thinking what's going to happen between now and, around 8 o'clock. So that's a good time. 80s music tends to put me in a good mood. And I'm just going to be honest with you, Sean. I've even got a podcaster playlist, which is stuff I listen to just before podcasts. So I use music a lot, Sean, to try to get me to the kind of energy that I want for a particular interaction.
What is it about music that seems to be able to shift your state of being for whatever interaction that you're having?
I think for me, I grew up in a war zone. I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, and there'd be shelling and bombing and whatever else going on. And I'm old enough, Sean, that I was around during the Walkman era. And most of your listeners probably never heard of this, but there was this little gadget. You put a cassette in it, you get some headphones on. And I just loved the way that music can transport you.
It is fascinating. Christian, I did have a Walkman.
Nice.
I guess
Oh, good. So you know what I'm talking about.
I'm feeling old too then. Yeah, the Walkman was wonderful. Well, thank you for that. Music is such a fascinating invention. I don't think the word is invention. It's just a fascinating thing that really can capture your soul, your mind, and your whole state of being. So thank you for sharing that.
Sean, when we talk about music and where it comes from, I think there's some things that are timeless, this interest in music, I think where there's been culture, where there's been societies, there's been music. So it's interesting to connect to all of those amazing things that are there. I think human beings have always loved to listen to music or to make music. but we've also loved stories, haven't we? These are things
Mm.
that seem to have been with us for so long. And so, yeah, I do love the idea that there's things we can do right now, Sean, that we've known about for literally centuries. And I think the busyness of everyday now, sometimes we forget about those things. We're like, wait a minute, we've got like this superpower. It really feels that way. 5 o'clock, Friday, it's been tiring. I'm not going home to my family. I'm going back to a hotel room. And yet, put a bit of music on, suddenly I'm in a different frame of mind. I'm upbeat. I'm kind of thinking, should I go to a bookshop? Shall I contact someone and we go for a drink? So, absolutely, I think there's so many beautiful things that we are able to do that somehow we've forgotten that we can just do anytime.
Mm. It's so true. It speaks to the power that we have inside of ourselves. And I hear you almost talking about how it seems like we rely on this external world to have
Mhm.
all the answers for ourselves. But I'm really hearing you speak to this truth that a lot of our own truth is coming from within.
Yeah, Sean. One of the book projects I'm just about to get started on, so I'm super excited. It's going to be called something like Micro Practices, but the book is exactly about these things. What are the little things that any of us can do at any time in the day that can have a positive impact on our well-being and maybe the well-being of those around us? And so these practices, you're right, we may already know about them, we can learn about them, but I love your point about it's our choice. And I know some listeners are going to be like, wait a minute, Christian, not everybody has choices. Yeah, not everybody has as many choices as some others, but I do love the idea that we have choices. And when we have choices, it gives us agency. And these choices are available to us any time of the day. But
Mm.
sometimes we're just not equipped to connect with them. Sometimes we think we don't have access to them. Sometimes we think they're not going to make a difference. And interestingly, Sean, like the little practice of when I'm getting overwhelmed with emails, let's say, I know that a 10-minute walk is almost like a reset button for me. If I stand up, I go out of my house and I walk for 10 minutes and I come back, there's a new kind of lens on everything. But the irony, Sean, is that when I most need to do that, I tell myself I haven't got time to do that. I don't want to do that. So there's this interesting thing of I do think that we have more choices, and just being a little bit more intentional about those choices can be good for our well-being and the well-being of others.
Thank you for that. I have written it down here because I want to come back to this idea of more choices than we think, like you're talking about.
Mm,
I think we should go into a bit about who you are for the listeners.
yeah.
And I mean this, you said a couple things that are making me think about a way to share who Christian is.
Mm,
You mentioned about growing up in Beirut
mhm,
during the Civil War.
that's right.
And you're talking this idea, I'm sensing an idea of identity or belonging here. I understand you had a Japanese mother, a Belgian father. You guys owned a Japanese restaurant in Beirut
That's
in the
right.
middle of all of this.
Yes.
Who did you have a sense of identity or belonging growing up with seemingly these many different the word gumbo is coming up, the New Orleans stew of a gumbo,
Oh,
so many
yeah.
different parts. So who was Christian growing up?
Yeah, I love gumbo. And one thing I love, Sean, is I love having gumbo in New Orleans, if you know what I mean. I just
Oh
love
yeah.
this idea of when you're somewhere, have the thing that's from that place. And so this idea of authenticity, somebody who's kind of really connected with their context, with their environment, these are important things for me. So thanks for, I have been to New Orleans pretty recently, and I had gumbo there, and it was great. I also had, I think, turtle. Not as great, but also fun. Also fun to try. So I'm always open to new things, Sean. I love opportunities. But it's a lens thing, isn't it? Because you can go somewhere and your lens can be, this is very different from what I normally eat. Where can I find what I normally eat? So that could be my lens is, do you have kind of the kind of food I'm normally used to because that's what I eat? And I think that's great. But I'd be missing out if I did that. If I went to New Orleans and I'm looking for what I'm always eating, my sense is, am I missing something where I could learn? Because the
Mm.
almost guaranteed thing is if I stick to what I already know, there's less learning. So, yeah, I grew up in Beirut. And, there's one lens which is saying, well, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. How could this happen? And I was born in a war zone. But there's another sense that that's the best thing that ever happened to me. And that without those things happening, I wouldn't be here now, Sean, talking to you. I'm pretty sure of that. I would not be
Mhm.
right here talking to you. And yeah, the collection of influences is fascinating. My friends were Lebanese kids, so they would speak in Arabic and they'd be the local kids, and I'd be one of those kids. And I was so small then, 5, 6. This question of who are you and where do you come from wasn't part of it. We were like, hey, there's a ball here. We're going to kick the ball. We're going to throw the ball to one another. So I grew up speaking Arabic with people around me because, well, that seemed normal. I didn't even think of it as this is a different language I have to learn, Sean, because this is what everybody's speaking, right? At home, my mother was Japanese. So again, that's what we spoke at home. I didn't think, I've got to learn this language. That's the only way I could communicate with my mother. She never learned any other language apart from Japanese. And then I went to an American school, an American community school. I went to an American university. Then I went to a British university. So most of my formal education has been in English. But our listeners, you get it. When you're learning in English, you're not only learning a language, you're learning a cultural way of seeing things. And so I think I was lucky because,
Mm.
when I'm thinking or speaking in Japanese, I think differently, Sean. I think when I'm speaking in Japanese, I think with more humility. I think with more care about how my words are going to land with others. Whereas if I'm speaking in Arabic, I'm thinking about relationships and connections and how do you bring people closer to you. So I think I was very lucky. And, who am I? What's my identity? That was the American school that told me that was important. They were like, who are you? And what are you going to do? And that was fun to think about that. And remember, my mother would be telling me, it's not about you. You're just kind of blending in. It's more about the society. It's more about people around you. So I think I've been able to be very fortunate to say, well, I love that part of the
Mm.
Western way of thinking, which is to present ideas with conviction, to try and convince people of things, to be certain of things. And then from the Arab culture, the idea of hospitality, of human connection, of personal warmth, those concepts I've loved. And from Japan, so many wonderful things. But to give you an example, this idea of not wasting anything. That's a Japanese concept. The word is mottainai, which is, it doesn't mean you're wasting anything. It means use everything. and and then link to that. So if you in Japan you get a fish, you want to use as much of that fish as possible. You don't want to throw stuff away. And for me, Sean, that links to the idea of respect. If I'm going to kill an animal to eat it, it seems disrespectful to say, well, I'm just going to have this tiny little bit. I mean, if I've done that already, it seems respectful. So there's lots of beautiful ideas. And I think, Sean, I'm lucky. The luckiest thing that happened to me is that, nobody has ever tried to convince me that there's only one correct way of seeing things. So I've always been open and curious, and I hope, Sean, that's your experience of me as well, is I'm open to ideas, I'm curious. Every kind of idea I have is tentative. And for me, Sean, I'm always thinking, I know what I think right now, but I'm not sure that that's correct. I'm kind of it's always for me, these are theories that I have based on what I know. And I'm open to changing that theory based on new experiences, new interactions. And so I hold those things tentatively. And again, coming back to my experience of wartime, um, people being too certain about their views is dangerous. There's danger attached to somebody saying, I'm so sure of my view, I'm so sure that I'm right, that I'm prepared to kill you if you don't agree, or I'm prepared to kill you to convince you that my view is correct. And that comes from certainty. And Sean, if we follow the logic stands. Because imagine I do have access to the truth and I know something and everybody around me does not know it. Logically, it makes sense that I should convince them and I should fight hard to tell them because I know something to be completely true and they don't know that. So for me, because of my personal experiences, I like the idea of, I have ideas, but they're tentative.
Christian, thank you. That was really, really well said. And it just felt refreshing to hear about having this humility to our views and I guess softening ourselves from the rigidity of our views. And I'm going back to this gumbo. Someone taught us how to make a gumbo in New Orleans, and they said, you know what? It doesn't matter if it's shrimp, chicken, pork. It's a very forgiving recipe. And so, you know what? The gumbo, even a delicious gumbo, doesn't have its rigid views that it needs to have chicken or shrimp. It needs a good roux, and then it's open to the possibilities. Maybe I'm stretching with my gumbo example here. But you talked about the influence from the Japanese culture about use everything. And it sounds like this is what was happening with you culturally. You're using parts of the Arabic way of being, the Japanese, the English, and so forth. When you decided to then move to England, when you arrived in England, I believe it was England you went to afterwards.
Yes.
What was, I guess, where was that decision? Or like, why did you decide to leave? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful question because if you grow up in a place like Beirut, Lebanon, I think you can't help but feel some kind of loyalty towards it because it went through very, very difficult times. And there was part of me that thought, you know what, I can't leave. It feels disloyal to just pack up and go. So there was that. My mother was a remarkable Japanese lady who set up a restaurant in Beirut. She set it up in 1973 when I was just 2 years old. So imagine that. So she'd set this up. She'd run this restaurant for decades. And I grew up in that restaurant, Sean. I was running around when I was 5 years old, getting in everybody's way. But from when I was 11, I was serving tables, I was cleaning tables, and I worked my way up to managing the front of house of this restaurant. And so there was a loyalty thing there as well, Sean. Here's my mother who, risked her life and spent all these years from the income she got from this restaurant. She paid for private education for me, and all of this. So it would have been impossible for me to leave um, from many perspectives. But my mother was wonderful. And one day she said to me, she said, Christian, if you want this restaurant, it's yours. I'm happy for you to take it over. Once I retire, you can have it. It was a successful Japanese restaurant, wonderful clientele. But she also said, if you want to do your own thing, you can do it. She said, don't feel you have to do that. And without that conversation, I would have never done anything else. I had assumed
Mm.
that was what was expected. So that kind of generosity, that was so important. But then there was another factor. You know, at the time that we decided to leave, I'd been married for less than a year. We had a child on the way. So my partner was pregnant and, still going about our everyday. I used to work in the restaurant at night. I used to teach at a university in the daytime. My partner was teaching in a school. So we were kind of set up for this is our life. We've got a restaurant. I loved the teaching. It was all kind of. But then there were airstrikes on the country. There was, fighter jets bombing different parts of the city that I was living in, and my wife and I had to get in the car and escape into the mountains. And trust me, Sean, I'd been doing that for the last 20
Mhm.
years. So there was nothing new in terms of trying to avoid those things. But the new factor was we had a child on the way. And in that moment, Sean, I thought, I'm used to this. My partner's used to it. We've grown up here. I believe human beings get used to anything. That's where we are. But it was helpful to have another person to think about. And when I took a moment to think, this is my life, but is this the life I want for my son? Not even born yet. Do we want to be doing, oh, there's an air raid or there's been a car bomb? And that's when I thought, no, I don't want that. And on that day, my partner and I had a conversation. I loved university. I was studying. I was doing studying Elizabethan drama at university, and I said, you know what? I'm going to apply to go to a university either in the United States or in the United Kingdom. And I said, I'm going to apply to do a PhD somewhere. And that's what happened. And again, Sean, just thinking about all the things, all the fortune I've had. My mother then also was super supportive because she said, go and do that thing. And if it doesn't work out, you can always come back here. We'll be waiting
Mm.
for you. The university I was at also said, if you get your PhD and come back, you've got a, tenured job with us. And they said, if you go and come back and you didn't finish your PhD, you can come back and work for us. So it's a huge leap, Sean. It's a huge leap to say, I'm going to go to a brand new country. And, maybe I'm not the most courageous person. So to have that kind of look, if it doesn't work out, you can come back here and things will be okay, is such a beautiful advantage. And if I think about all the people in the world now who are making dangerous journeys to go to somewhere to live a new life, I'd say most of them, they don't have that opportunity. It's either they make it or they
Mhm.
don't make it. So just to have that safety of somebody saying, and that spurred me on. It allowed me to be a bit more courageous. And as things happened, Sean, we came to England. It took me 10 years to finish my PhD for a start. But apart from that, it was safe, Sean. And I can't explain to our listeners, unless they've been through something like this, to flick the switch, the light switch, and the lights to come on, or to turn the tap and there's hot water, or to think, I can send my son to school and I don't need to worry about, uh, you know, high chance of violence. those things were so precious. And I remember, Sean, I turned to my partner as soon as we'd landed, and I said, look, if I ever stop appreciating this, you have to remind me what I'm feeling right now, the gratitude, the appreciation. So I stayed here. I worked in local government for a number of years, supporting schools. So I'm really grateful to be here. I am an immigrant here, but I think I've added some value. I think I've contributed to this society, and I'm still grateful for being here. But equally, Sean, this summer I'll be flying back to Beirut, Lebanon, to see family and friends that I have there. So yeah, it was a really important part of my uh, growing up, and my identity is such a weird question, because um, there's perspectives, right? We've talked about that already. One perspective is that I'm a foreigner everywhere.
Hmm.
That's one perspective that I could take, which is everywhere I go, I'm a foreigner. If I go to Japan, I don't look Japanese. They call me Hafu, which, if they know my mother's Japanese, the term for that is a half Japanese, half something else. If I go back to Lebanon, they see me as a Westerner. When I'm here in England, people do always say, oh, where are you from? Which, again, from with my ears, sometimes where are you from sounds like you're not from here. And I know it's not
Hmm.
intended that way, right? But so everywhere I go, you could say I'm a foreigner. Or the other way is that I'm not particularly attached to a location. I don't feel this is my only location. I do feel when I travel, these are all different locations. And I'd love to think I'm not actually connected to geographical space because I was born there or because one of my parents had a particular passport. I love the idea that I can be comfortable wherever I am.
Thank you for that. I mean, what a good state to be in, as I could feel comfortable wherever I am.
Yeah.
Your mother sounds like a remarkable person. 1973, as an immigrant to a new country, starting a restaurant as a
Yeah.
female. This is incredible feats. I want to point something out that I found really remarkable of what she did. And I'm a father and I want to help serve my children. But you talked about how she kind of gave you this permission to fail,
Mm.
that if it doesn't go well, you can come back.
Yeah.
But she also seemed to give you this permission to be yourself,
Oh, yeah.
saying you can run this restaurant or you can go do what you want.
Mm.
I find there's something so incredibly powerful when we can see people for who they are, and in a way, it gives them permission to be who they are.
Mm.
Did your mother provide that with you?
Yeah, Sean, it was a life-changing moment for me, and I'm not exaggerating for effect or anything. It hadn't occurred to me, Sean, that I could do anything else. My sense of
Mm,
loyalty was so strong that I thought it would be unacceptable to say to my mother, oh, I want to do something else. I thought there's no question. And it hadn't occurred to me that it's even possible to do something else. So when I was studying at university, it was out of interest. I was studying English literature and Elizabethan drama, not because I wanted to do anything with them, because I thought my life is connected to this business. And to be honest, my ideas, I had ideas, but it was, for example, to upgrade elements of the restaurant, maybe open another branch in another location. So all of my kind of planning was to do with that. And it was that one conversation, and I'm glad she had that conversation with me,
mhm.
where I really thought about it a lot. My initial reaction was, no, 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 no. But then when I thought about it, I went back and said, you said that thing. I said, I can see another route for me. I'm really interested in education. I'm really, I've done university degrees. By the way, Sean, there's an interesting story about why I did so much education, which is that my nationality is Belgian. My passport is Belgian. And at the time I was in school, Belgium had this conscription law, which was that every young Belgian of a certain age had to serve in the Belgian army. It was
Mm.
mandatory. And I think it was like 18 months or a shorter period if you served overseas somewhere. So there was this thing hanging over me. But remember, I'm loyal. I was an integral part of our business. And I thought, well, I can't leave my mother here on her own. So I didn't want to do that military service. And the only exemption was if you're in full-time education. So if you're in full-time education, you're exempt from that, but any other reason. So that's why once I finished school, I didn't need a university degree. Remember, we have our restaurant. It was doing pretty well, but full-time education. So I signed up. I picked a topic that I was interested in. I studied 4 years, full-time, bachelor's degree. Then, okay, now master's, 2 years, American system, 2 years master's, full-time. And that was to avoid being conscripted. So now, if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have had the option of saying, right, we're going to get a PhD now. But because,
Mm.
and here's a completely other topic, Sean, but I think because I was at university studying something that I wanted to learn about with no other intention to say, well, I'm doing this to get this job. I was really into it. I loved literature. I loved Elizabethan drama. So I was getting good grades. I had great relationships with my professors. And a couple of my professors had told me, you know what, if you wanted to follow this path, you'd be a great academic. And I was like, you must be joking, right? I'm a great waiter. I'm doing great. And I said, I'm not an academic. But that little seed, when there was that air raid and we had to leave the country, that little seed of, oh, yeah, those professors told me maybe I could do this, allowed me to apply. And I applied to a university in the United States. And I applied to the 2 best universities that taught Shakespeare. And, again, honestly, I thought, well, I'm never going to get accepted. But somehow, the University of Birmingham here in the United Kingdom, they said, yeah, you can have an interview. And then they accepted me onto the thing to come and do a PhD in Elizabethan drama. Imagine, I got a chance to study Shakespeare in the town where Shakespeare was born,
Mm.
Stratford-on-Avon. So it was a beautiful story. My son went to school. This is a true story, Sean. And imagine, this is from, there's an air raid. I don't know whether we should stay here, all sorts of trouble going on. My son went to the same school that Shakespeare went to, William Shakespeare
Wow.
School.
Wow. It's a full circle moment for you.
Yeah. And all of life has been a full circle moment because that was already good enough, Sean. That moment that I landed in the UK, I was like, that's me. I'm happy if nothing else happens from now on. And then you're right, that moment where my son went to that school, I was like, right, apart from that, I'm happy with all of this. So, I haven't had very high aspirations. I've never thought, well, I want X or Y or Z. I think my aspirations have always been, in my view, pretty reasonable. I love the idea of, I really want something, but I don't want to pursue something that seems to me way beyond what I can achieve. And there is a link to money here, Sean, because, and this is a silly story, so apologies, but, I love cars. I love cars. I love motorcycles. And you know what it's like. You go to a showroom and I'm always thinking, this is my budget. So I won't test drive anything I can't afford. So the salesperson's like, hey, why don't you try this car? I'm like, how much is it? And if it's
Mhm.
beyond my budget, I don't even want to test drive it. because I do like to have goals, Sean. I like to have goals that I think if I put effort and energy, I might be able to get that thing. And that motivates me and engages me. But I don't like going 5 steps ahead.
It could be quite alluring, those showrooms, all those nice vehicles. So I really like how much you articulate these seeds, to use your words, like planting the seeds
Yeah.
that seem to blossom into whom we are.
Yeah.
You talk about money, and you mentioned, just look at my note here, you don't have these large goals or aspirations that are too distant, as opposed to maybe more realistic ones that you can accomplish. I think all of this is in part, to some part, driven by our relationship or the story that we're telling ourselves about money. When you look back to this upbringing in Beirut with the restaurant, your mother opening a restaurant, what story were you carrying with yourself about money when you landed in England?
Yeah. Well, money was in Japanese, the restaurant business is called Mizushobai, which is water business almost. On the idea that it's a bit like water. One day you could have a great day, 1 month could be a good month, the next month could be really bad. And then add on top of that civil war and bombing and shelling and restaurants having to be closed for a while. So our access to money was highly erratic. So we have a good month where we're doing great, and then you can have 2 bad months. So I always have had this idea of we need every opportunity. I have to take it. You can't turn down an opportunity. It affects me even today, Sean. My diary's packed this month. Somebody says, "Hey, do you want to do?" Yeah, I want to do that work, because who knows? Next month I'd not have any work, right? Now, that meant, so when I was working in the restaurant in Beirut, there could be a month where we get hardly any customers because there'd literally be tanks and militiamen fighting on the streets outside our restaurant, and people just can't get to where we are. So I had to diversify. So with a friend of mine, we had a car that I would use as a taxi. I would take people places. Because I spoke Japanese and Arabic and English, I'd be the gopher for journalists. The one thing that the war did bring is journalists from all over the world, from the UK, from Canada, from the US, Australia, Japan. And those journalists would end up in our restaurant because it was a well-known Japanese restaurant. And then I would overhear them saying, "Oh, we need a translator. We pay this much per day. We need a driver." So I became the person who'd say, "Hey, if you're looking for a driver and a translator, I know a good driver, I know a translator." So it did make me quite entrepreneurial, but it's not because I love business, but I'm like, when the fighting is particularly bad, the restaurant's not going to be operating, but there's this other line of work. And it's really interesting. I was very fortunate that I was able to bring my mother here to England after she retired. So we got her this beautiful little apartment, small apartment, very independent minded. So she wanted to live by herself, Sean. And so we're kitting it out for her, the kitchen or whatever. And then she says to me, "The fridge, it's a little bit small." I'm like, "Mum, you're on your own." It was a full-size fridge, big fridge with a small freezer. She said, "No, I'm going to need a chest freezer. I need a big freezer." She said, "Just in case we run out of stuff," right? So we'd grown up in Lebanon where you just don't know when you can get stuff. And I got her the freezer because I understood. But that was still in her mindset. I was like, we're in England now. We're not going to run out of meat or whatever it is. But she always had a fully stocked freezer, even in England. And she and I would talk about that. She did say, "I've brought this with me, haven't I? This idea of just in case, make sure you've got enough stuff to keep you going. And so I've got a lot of stuff like that, and I'm grateful for it, Sean.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. You know, you speak to this idea that we all have these journeys we've traveled, that we've collected these views, these perspectives, and at some times they can be challenging, like growing up where your safety's at risk in a war country. I appreciate your perspective on these experiences, how you choose to see what you can benefit from it or what you can take from these experiences. So thank you very much for sharing that. And as I think about your journey, so you're a leading expert in the world, I would say, on coaching, positive psychology, and I think helping people align, or helping mere people align I guess align better. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but align better with who they are. I'm curious on how you see your work. So this is a two-part question, is maybe just describe your work and what you do, which is multifaceted. But also the other part is, back to your story, is you didn't come to this as a straight line. You mentioned your PhD took 10 years. I imagine there was some challenged thoughts of, am I going to finish this? From journalism to the bookstore you worked at, the restaurant, there's all this cacophony of experiences. You had all these different doors that were being opened up. What landed with coaching that you decided to be like, I'm going to hang my hat here?
It's a great question. I think, my talking to you has clarified to me right now why some of the projects I'm working on are important, right? So I guess my feeling is that we have more control over our own perspectives than we often think. And so I'd love to share that idea. And I'd love to share it from a point of credibility, Sean, to say, look, I've had my own share of tough experiences. And I think there's different ways for me to see my own experiences and to make a story out of them, because each one of us is creating our own story, right? And this could be a wonderful story, or it could be a pretty tough story. And I guess my big question right now for when I work with other people is the story they're telling themselves, is it good for their well-being and those around them? And if it's good for their well-being and those around them, I think, great. Let's amplify that story. Let's support that story. And if the story we're telling is not good for our well-being or the well-being of those around us, I guess my message is, and I'm not saying it's easy by any means, I'm just saying it is possible to either change our perspective or actually do things that will lead to a different story. So that what I don't want is our past events to hold us prisoner, to say, well, the story's already been written because these things happened before. It's possible that we get trapped in it, but I'm just saying it is possible to change those. And I think there's little practices we can do at any time. Like we talked, that 80s music. I think the main thing I'm promoting is 80s music, Sean.
Good music.
Yeah, it's good music. But joking apart, the idea of me knowing what is good for my well-being is so important. And all of us probably know that. But we forget. We forget, oh, spending time with my family is good. Going to the movies gives me a boost or not. Going for a walk, being curious. There's so many things, and it's going to be different for each person, but we know what they are, and we can use those strategically. So I showed up, like I said, in the UK, 1997. Remember, super grateful. And I thought, my goodness, I can't believe I get to live here where, there's no violence, people are nice to you. It was just unbelievable. At the time I came, universities were free, schools were free, hospitals were free. I was like, this is, I can't believe it. So because of my gratitude, I did want to work for the public sector. And I thought, well, it's possible. Is it possible? And I ended up working for local government here in Warwickshire, where I am now, and working in the education department. Because one thing I haven't mentioned is how crucial my education was to allow me to do what I talked about. Remember, I went to an American university, I applied for a British university. And so when I look back to that time, my educators are, may have saved my life. They've certainly, so my view is every child is entitled to a good education, because if we provide a good education to every child, they have more options. That's my only argument. And they don't even have to take those options. But what we're doing if we provide a good education is we're providing more options to human beings, and they can decide to do whatever it is they like. So when I got to England, I thought, I'd love to work in the education sector. So while I was doing my PhD, I started working for local government, and I ended up working for a division within local government that looked after the professional development and training of teachers, because my view of how do you provide a good education to every child is you support educators, you equip them, you look after them, you value them. So I think we all have a shared interest in making sure that we respect and support educators. So I thought, well, I'm going to get a chance to do that. And so this department I worked with, one of the things it did was provide professional development and training for teachers. And I thought, well, I want to do my best to support that. And one of my responsibilities became quality assurance, Sean, for the professional development that we were providing to teachers. And so I changed the, evaluation form. So it's not just about, did you enjoy your lunch? I was like, what was good about the learning? And also, crucially, I put in a question at the end. What is going to be different in your classroom as a result of the professional learning you did today or whatever? And I should have left it at that, because the evaluation forms were great. My colleagues were the best possible facilitators. We were all committed to doing good work. But I made a mistake, which is I thought a year later, I'm just going to get back in touch with some of these people. And I picked the best evaluation forms, the ones that said, I loved it. Because remember, they'd all written down this is what's going to be different. So got back in touch. I said, hey, I'm Christian. I work for that organization. I said, I've got this evaluation form in front of me. 1 year ago, you completed it. You loved the course, and you said this was going to be different. Is it different? And all of them, Sean, every person I interviewed, I must have interviewed 40, 42, 44 people. They said no. We did not implement the learning from that professional development course. And that's despite it. They loved it. It was great training. So that's when coaching appeared, Sean, because I then went into research to say, what's going to help implementation of learning? And there was a great article. It's Joyce and Showers, I think 1983 article, where they showed that if you do training and provide coaching after the training, implementation increases by something like 80%. And then I thought, well, what is this thing, coaching? I trained to become a coach. I, then provided coaching in education. I ended up writing a book about coaching in education. And so that's what convinced me that there's value to coaching. And today, Sean, I still think coaching is one of the most respectful ways of supporting the professional learning and growth of people. And remember, I said earlier, for me, treating our teachers with respect is crucial for our societies. So I thought this is great. It's a win-win because you get greater implementation and we're treating our teachers like the professionals they are. So that's what got me interested. And you're right about all the little dots. A lot of it seems random, but there is this through line of, look, I really want to make things better if I can. So I've kept thinking, well, how can we make things better? So the fact I was doing that work, Sean, led a wonderful colleague and mentor of mine to say, oh, we're teaching this at a university. It happens to be University of East London. And he said to me, this is also a true story. He said, look, we're looking for somebody to design a course called Coaching in Education. And would you be willing to come and teach at our university? And I said, I don't have a lot of experience teaching at university. I did that a long while back. And he said, no, you need to have a PhD and you need to have experience of what you're talking about. I said, I do have a PhD, but it's in Elizabethan drama. And he said, as long as in the interview you can explain how it's relevant. So I got a job at University of East London to develop that module, Coaching in Education. And then after a little while, I ended up leading that program, Masters in Coaching Psychology. But remember what I said earlier about I'm always open, I'm always curious. So when positive psychology started becoming popular and I was hearing more about that, I thought, what's going on there? And that's when I was one of the people who really pushed for the integration of coaching and positive psychology, because I thought coaching is a methodology for bringing about behavioral change. Positive psychology is the science of well-being. It's the science of human beings at their best. And I thought it seems to make sense to bring those two fields together. And that's where the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology was born. That's where my partnership with Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener started. That's what's led to my current professional role. So it is interesting talking to you, Sean, and thanks for your questions and interest. There is some kind of connectivity between all of those things, but I'm not done yet, just to be clear, because I'm headed, Sean. What I really want to do is find ways to share what's being learned through positive psychology and through academic research and through publications and all of this. But my big question is, how can we share these ideas in ways that make tangible and sustainable differences in people's lives? So I don't know the answer to that question, but this conversation, being asked about these things, talking about these things, it might all be part of it.
Thank you so much. I love watching you tell your story, and your inflection goes up and down at certain points. And I can just feel how embodied your journey is in you.
Yeah.
You've talked about having a curious mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and your words were, I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
You continuously want to make things better.
Yeah.
You've done so much work in the field of coaching and positive psychology. I know you've looked at it through a Western lens, then through perhaps more of your book, more of an Islamic lens without goals, I guess.
Yeah.
And now I understand you're bringing in Buddhism.
That's right.
What is Buddhism bringing to your journey that perhaps wasn't there before when it comes to yourself and this field of coaching?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's definitely completely changing my perspective on what's important. And I think, I'm always, like I said, curious, and I'm thinking, what are other people saying? And of course, in Western tradition, especially in the English speaking Western tradition, of course, we're going to focus on philosophers that are from this tradition. Of course, we're going to focus on sources and texts that are available in our own language. Of course, academic papers, we're going to focus on those that are available in English, which is the majority of academic papers, by the way.
Uh-huh.
So I've always been curious to say, what can we learn from the wisdom and tradition of other cultures? So I think I'm open to any. And when I say I'm not done yet, Buddhism, that's one example. And I've just learned so much by working on this book. It's going to be called The Lotus of Thriving. But I'm open to people who are saying, Christian, in my tradition, we do this, or and one of the possible books on the horizon is one that links Japanese
Hmm.
thinking and Japanese tradition. So that's kind of a possibility. I've spoken to people about Christianity as well. And so my view is that there's wisdom there, things that we've known for centuries, that in our rush and in the hurly-burly of every day, we kind of forget about it. And I'm like, no, people have spent thousands of years,
Hmm.
sometimes hundreds of years, generations of people have studied something. And positive psychology is a good example of that, Sean, because nothing we study in positive psychology is new. I can't see one area there where I'm saying nobody's ever thought of that. Philosophers, over 1,000 years ago, have thought about these things. So I think what we really need to do is see what can we learn from today without losing sight of some of those things that we've known for many, many years and sometimes centuries.
Christian, this comes back to this idea of perhaps the answer that we long for is more inside of us or right in front of us more than we think.
Yeah.
I understand you've been getting out into nature lately. I don't know if it's lately, maybe you always have, but I read you did the 20-day Annapurna
Uh,
trek, which I had the privilege of doing as well.
oh, wow.
You went to Mount Kilimanjaro. Is there a moment, whether it's on your motorcycle, these treks, where you're just in this journey that you're not submerged into the busyness of the day-to-day life, where perhaps it's a conversation, a view, but something that stopped you in your tracks to be like,
Mm,
I knew this all along, or that feeling of like, I've been missing this.
yeah,
Do you have any of
yeah.
those moments you could share?
Yeah, I want to talk about my travels. I've only started doing this 2 years ago, Sean, because my dream, one of my dreams, was to ride Route 66 from
Mhm.
Chicago right through to Santa Monica, and I wanted to ride it on a Harley Davidson. And I've been wanting to do that since I was 13, 14 years old when I watched Eric Estrada on this TV program called CHIPS, California Highway Patrol. Two motorcycle officers who were riding around on Harley Davidsons in California. And I used to watch that. And I remember as a child thinking, one day I want to be in the US on a Harley Davidson wearing Ray-Bans. So I had that. And I was being coached by somebody I really admire, a wonderful, experienced coach and mentor. And in his coaching, he said, Christian, is there something you've been wanting to do that you've haven't done? And he made me realize my role as a coach has been for as long as I've been coaching, I'm really helping people to pursue what it is they've always wanted to do. And it really caught me by surprise to say, wait a minute, I've been wanting to do this for more than 30 years, 40 years maybe. I never did it. And at the end of one coaching conversation, I put in the diary for a year later, June 2024. I crossed the whole month out and I put Route 66. And the only thing that was stopping me, Sean, and that was the coaching was about, and I hope this resonates with our listeners. My coach said, "Oh, so you've always been wanting to do this?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So what's stopping you? Is it your organization?" I said, no, I can take annual leave. I'm entitled to 3 weeks of annual leave. Oh, so my coach said, "Oh, so it's not your organizer. Oh, is it your family? Are they?" I said, no, my family are super supportive. They want to. And then the coach said, "So it's your finances. You can't." I said, "No, I've saved up money. I've been saving money for." And then he asked, "So what is it?" And that moment, I'll never forget it. I got tearful at the time. I wasn't giving myself permission.
Hmm.
The only thing stopping me, and I was blaming everything, Sean. I was saying, I haven't got time, my organization, bloody, coming up with all sorts of things. But I thought, wait, what if it's a gift to myself? What if I get to do this thing? So I did that. I rode it. I was on a Harley, Ray-Bans, the whole thing.
Nice.
I rode 19 days riding across the United States. So one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And it was great. And then when I did that, I thought, I want more of this in my life, of things which I'm doing just
Hmm.
because I want to do them. I'm on this planet for a certain amount of time. I love traveling. I love experiencing things. And then when I was speaking to my good friend and colleague and mentor, Dr. Jim Knight, he was so supportive of the Route 66. He actually created a playlist for me. He said, "Here's a Route 66 playlist. Listen to this as you ride through." Um, when I got there, he said, "Well done. I really admire you for doing the kinds of things you've always wanted." And then I turned to Jim and I said, "Jim, what things have you always wanted to do?" And that's when he said Nepal. He said, "I've always wanted to go to Nepal." He'd never been. It was going to be his 70th birthday. And he said, "Maybe I should do it." And he said, "If I go, will you come along?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come along." And that's how the Nepal thing happened. And then I thought, every year I'm going to dedicate some time to do something like that. So that's my plan. This year we're going back to Nepal. We're going to do Everest Base Camp this year.
Wow, good for you
Yeah.
guys.
And so, yeah, but on the trek. So the Buddhism book, my goodness, it's destabilizing, Sean. We've written the book in a way that it's less destabilizing. There's some core things we believe in the West that are challenged. So we've written it in a way that it's accessible, I hope, and people aren't going to feel completely off balance. But writing that book has really helped me to accept things like impermanence, the idea that the concept of the self isn't as strong as we might think, that me and I and all of this is not as important, that we are all connected, that those some beautiful ideas, the idea of equanimity, those words and those ideas are very challenging. So I just love this. For me, my mind's always racing. Our listeners probably already picked that up. My mind's dashing here and there. So the ability to be present in the moment is something that I really value. When my mind's not racing, I'm not thinking about 100 different things. I'm able to just be right here. And the reason I turned to Buddhism to learn is because there you have a tradition which is all about training the mind. That's how I would see it, that their thing is Let's train our mind. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier. Is the way that we're thinking about, is the way we're perceiving things, is the story we're telling, is it good for my well-being or not? And here's a whole tradition which is about training our minds. So that's why I became interested in that. And this idea of being able to be really in the moment right now, that's something that I've learned from Buddhism. And now, I get that experience. I like ice bathing, Sean. I don't know if any of our listeners have done ice bathing.
I've tried. I have arthritis and I keep in my hips, and everyone tells me to try it. Despite
Wow.
I live in the tundra in Canada,
Yeah.
I get so cold. Anyways,
Yeah.
so I've tried it, but it's hard.
It's hard. And if you do it, and I'd invite some of our listeners to try it out, if you do it, you get into the then you know what we're talking about, which is that in
Yeah.
that moment, you're not thinking about anything else. You're right there as a human being. So I love doing that. On the Annapurna circuit, the times that I got close to that is awe of beauty. So just the awe of nature, how beautiful things are. But also interestingly, Sean, when I was on the verge of giving up, I'm just so tired. I think I can't walk another step. But somehow in those moments, you're kind of right there, nothing else, everything else kind of fades into the background. And this is compared, Sean. So I've been walking for days. The only thing we have to do every day is get from one location to the other. I just love the simplicity of that. And that's compared to my everyday where first thing in the morning, I've got 280 emails in my inbox. And it becomes almost like an obsession of I need to clear my inbox. I need to reply to. But when you can take yourself out of that, sometimes you get a little perspective on, wait, are all these things I'm doing, are they supporting what's important for me? So a fun little activity I get some of my coaching clients to do is I'll be like, could you please list the 4 most important things in your life? Right? 4 things. And they can be anything, the 4 things that are most important to you. So they would jot something down. I give them some time. Then here's the challenging bit, Sean. I would say, okay, now look at your typical weekday. How much of your time during the typical weekday are you doing things that relate to those 4 things? How much of your time? And that sometimes there's a mismatch, Sean. I'm thinking, wow, we know what's important to us. And how powerful could it be even if we could make minor adjustments so that more of every day I'm doing the things that are important to me and those around me. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. Having said all of this stuff, I'm hopeful that, especially with the advent of AI, because AI can do a lot of this stuff that that I'm spending a lot of my time on right now. But the other reason I'm optimistic is because AI is going to force us to say what's most human about us. That's what we need to spend our time doing. And AI can spend a lot of the time doing the stuff that's important to do, but is maybe getting in the way of our well-being.
Christian, I enjoy hearing the way you think about these important topics of what's most important to me. I highlighted and wrote down here and underlined that statement when you were talking about Route 66 of, so what's stopping you from your coach? I think that's a powerful one. As we talk about time in this conversation, our time is looking like it's coming to a closing here. I have 2 questions for you that are percolating up for me.
Great.
And this idea of the 4 things that you're just talking about, like the 4 items, and are we aligning our daily activities, our life with those things, I think is really important. Having all these experiences that you've had, these perspectives on what is a good life, this idea of like impermanence, that nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
How has your relationship with money evolved? And I
Yeah.
ask this from the lens of many of the people I speak with we have these aspirations to get more in line with who we are, get out for 19 days on a motorcycle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yet, there's this overwhelming belief at times, and sometimes it's the truth, but we can't do it because we need to work or we need to
Yeah, yeah.
succeed. We need to meet this financial objective.
Yeah.
How have you balanced this life and relationship you have with money?
Yeah, yeah. I wonder how people would call my relationship with money. I do remember,
Christian,
um,
actually, can I ask you something? I would
yes,
like to know, how would you call it? What would you name it?
my relationship, maybe
Mhm.
balanced, because I do see the value. I see the value of money in being able to provide us with help us meet our needs. And like you said, money can get us kind of experiences because going Route 66 was not cheap. But let me tell you what I do, and I do bring a positive psychology lens to this. I think, let's say, experiences. For me, experiences are so important. We're
Mhm.
designed to be able to have experiences and perceive them and be conscious of experiences. That's one thing I think we can all be sure of. And there's some experiences that are good for our well-being. And my question is, what can we do to amplify that? So I'd like to think, well, for each one experience of well-being, can we triple the power of that or the well-being benefits of that? And I do think it's possible. I've been thinking about this a lot. So Route 66, part of it, getting the well-being impact for me is anticipation, looking
Mm.
forward to this thing and starting to dream about it and think about it. And what I did, Sean, I started this about 15 years ago in the UK. I started saving for this trip. And the way I did it was £5 notes. In the United Kingdom, we have a green £5 note. And I just thought in my everyday interactions, there was a lot more cash used back then, Sean. I thought in my everyday interactions, every £5 note I got back, I would put it to one side. It wasn't something hugely noticeable. It might be two a week. So every time I got a £5 note, I would put it away. And I did that for like 15 years of collecting £5 notes. But, and now you're going to think I'm super weird, but like once a year, I'd count all my £5 notes. And again, I'm being too honest here. I started categorizing them by number and letter. They have letters. So A, whatever. And I just kept them. And it was nice because I was thinking this is for that adventure. And I
Mm.
kept saving and saving. So one way we can amplify the well-being benefits of experiences that are good for our well-being is the anticipation of them, the looking forward to it. I got maps, looked at documentaries, I asked people about it, all of that.
Mhm.
And then remember, I booked it a year in advance. It was blocked in my calendar. Then I had to get in touch with a rental agency. Every time I wasn't frustrated, I was excited. I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to happen. But then I needed a switch, Sean. I needed to switch because when you're on the journey, you want to be fully present. Remember what I was saying
Mhm.
about that ability to be fully present. Otherwise, you miss it.
Mhm.
So, for our listeners who have got a 5-year-old, don't miss it. Don't miss that. That's happening right now. So, the ability to be fully present. So, Route 66, I'm on Route 66. I wasn't thinking, what am I going to do at the end of this? Or why didn't I do this before? Because I'd done that. Every morning, I was like, I want to enjoy this. So, I had a little practice, which is every morning I'd have a coffee and I'd open the map of Route 66 and I'd say, where do I want to get to today? I'd plot the next location. I'd ride all day to get there. When I get there, I kind of look at the map, see where I'd come. So I was really trying to stay in the moment. And then the third way, the tripling effect, is positive reminiscing. So keep a record of it so that I can look back and say, oh my goodness, I really enjoyed that. And so I've kept a record. If anybody wants to see it, it's on my YouTube channel. There's one video for every day. There's a video for every trip. And in addition, Sean, because of my purpose, I've also shared one positive psychology practice that I had used on that day, just as a way of sharing with everyone. We can integrate these practices into our own lives. So, yeah, that's the Route 66 experience. So, and I know that people are going to be saying, well, I don't have time for that's great, Christian. I don't have time for it. And all I can say is I've got so much compassion for you, because I really hope that you're able to find some way to carve out time. And we've gone extreme to 3 weeks, right? But we can do things that are good for our well-being in 20 minutes. We can do, so for example, let's say you're really into art. Is it possible to carve out 3 hours when you can go to an art gallery somewhere, something you've always wanted to do? Because my view is that it gives you such a boost to your well-being that you're going to come back and you're going to be able to bring more energy to what it is you're doing. And remember, I already gave the example, Sean. Sometimes I'm working through my emails and I think what I need to do is go out for a 10-minute walk. And with all my experience of this, I still sometimes don't do it because I tell myself, no, Christian, you haven't got time for that. You got to work right through until it's done. But the quality of my work decreases. It's impacting on my well-being. We only have, all of us, only have limited amounts of energy. I'm pretty sure of that. And so it's like a case of mismanaging our energy. If I were to say, I'm going to work nonstop. I've got 200 emails, so I'm just going to work from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not doing what's best for me, and I'm not being at my most efficient. So I do recognize the time component here. So I would say one of my key learnings has been that investing or looking after our own well-being is not an indulgence. And that's probably why I wasn't doing Route 66. It sounded too selfish. It sounded too much like an indulgence. But remember, Sean, this is my work. My work is about live your best life. How could I be doing that work? But then I'm like, but I can't do the things that I've always wanted to do. So yeah, I hope it's useful just to give everybody permission. Remember, I needed permission. I'm in no position to give anybody permission, but if it helps you, you have my permission to prioritize your well-being, and just see how it lands. If you think, oh yeah, I did this thing for my well-being, it hasn't really helped me, it's I don't have time for it, that's okay. But I guess I'm saying try it out. Are there practices you can do? And these can be tiny practices. And the only purpose for doing the practice would be to enhance your well-being. And if you need it, if you need me to say this, I'll say it, which is maybe you need to look after your well-being so you can look after the well-being of others. But for me, that's an end in itself. Looking after your own well-being should be sufficient, but if it helps you so that you can be of better service to others.
Thank you so much for this deeply enriching conversation. My last question, Christian, that I've asked many, many people on the podcast is, let's imagine now that you're at end of life. You find yourself sitting on a front porch, looking out at a view that gives you complete ease, peace, and a sense of feeling content. Perhaps,
Wonderful.
I know you spend a lot of time in, I think it's Tenerife. Maybe it's there. Maybe it's elsewhere.
Maybe it's elsewhere.
You decide to take a notebook out to write a message you learned on the importance of living a meaningful life. What would be the message?
Yeah. I think be grateful. Because even as you explained that, Sean, um, I was grateful. I was thinking, I hope that's going to be the case for me. That would be such a wonderful way to wrap things up, sit on a porch peacefully, being able to look out. And I think that what I've brought, what's been good for my well-being, there's no guarantee it's good for everybody else's or anybody else's. But I do think I'm grateful. I'm appreciative, and w- with this idea of impermanence, we know that's the one thing we know is nothing is going to be forever. I'm just grateful that we have this opportunity now. And so, yeah, for me, being grateful has probably been good for my well-being.
Thank you so much for this conversation, for all the fantastic work that you've done. I appreciate you sharing your time with me and the audience.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for creating this platform. I know you do such valuable work through it. And thank you for helping people like me share some of the things we're learning.
For listeners who curiosity has been piqued about the work you're doing, where would you point them towards?
Yeah, well, I am going to point them because this is my passion project at the moment. It's called Coach on a Motorcycle. And my intention is to provide ideas and resources for free. So if you go to coachonamotorcycle.com, there's a whole website. I've got a YouTube channel called at Coach on a Motorcycle, and I've got an Instagram account at Coach on a Motorcycle. And my intention is to share the ideas as widely as possible. So if you go and have a look and you think there's something useful there, please share it with others.
Well, we will include all of that. And thanks again. I really, really appreciate our time together.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you for tuning in this week's episode with Christian. What a fascinating conversation. I love how deeply Christian thinks about the items going on in his life, who he is, who's his changing identity. As we talked about, all our identities change over time. And perhaps an important but yet difficult at times part of being a human is surrendering to that changing self or identity. My question today is in fact inspired by his decision to summit Kilimanjaro, ride his Harley down Route 66. What is the one thing you've been wanting to do, and what's actually stopping you? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. If you've been enjoying these episodes, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, take care.